Hello, this is Joe Goodspeed. I'm going to be tying my mini crayfish jig fly here in a size 6. I've got 6/0 camel colored uni thread. I'm going to use a pretty long length of 0.035 lead wire here. That I'm going to tie on the back side of the jig right down to where the point of the hook is. I'm going to anchor my thread and use the rotary action of my vise to wrap this 0.035 lead. I'm going to stop and cut this lead because I want to have this little stair step from the base of the hook to the first layer of the lead to the second layer of the lead for the tying structure of the fly. I'm going to take the dubbing that's going to be used on the body of the fly, and I'm going to use some loose dubbing to cover up the lead wire, not fully, but to some extent, on the base of the hook. I use a pair of tentacles or small rubber or silicone legs going out the back of this fly, and I put those on the back part of the fly. Here I'm using a small copper silicone barred leg. I'm going to tie this in so it sits on the first stair-stepped part of the lead wire. Now I'm going to set in, actually I'm going to put in a little bit of rabbit fur. This is a fulling mill rabbit fur strips, the natural color rabbit. I'm going to use just a little bit, and I'm going to pull out the gray fluffy fibers from underneath and just use the thinner natural fibers coming out the back end of the fly. Now I'm going to set in the legs. Okay, so I am tying the legs for a size 8 crayfish, and I'm going to use 3 strands of spandex in 3 different shades of a brown and a yellow brown. So I'm going to take all 3 strands and get them so the ends are in the same place, and then I'm going to tie an overhand knot with them. Pull that tight. And then I'm going to come and trim that off fairly close. Take the same thing and trying to keep the strands together so none of them are kind of more stretched out than each other. I'm going to tie another overhand knot. And then I'm going to cut that. So I have a pair of legs that I can have some room to tie in. I want the set of legs to sit out at a 45-degree angle. and I also want to tie them in so they can't fall off the fly. So I'm going to tie them in on the top in a bit of a figure 8 as I first set them. Now I'm going to push them to the back and keep them on the sides of the hook here on this first step of the lead of the fly. And once I have them there, I'm going to take my 6/0 thread and kind of give a nice tight wrap on them, which digs into the silicone and will force it to flare out a little bit because you want the legs to be splayed. And so you'll see that now that I'm tugging on that, the legs have splayed out. I'm going to take a soft hackle fiber, pretty slim pickings from what I'm working with here. I want a hackle fiber that's a little bit webby, and I'm going to tie it in so the shorter fibers will be wrapped in the back and the longer fibers will be wrapped in the front. And I will be tying this in back here again on this stair step. And the reason for having that stair step of lead is it's a thinner diameter. It makes it easier to tie the materials against than the thicker lead. So I'm going to tie that in, bring the thread to the front, I'm going to use my dubbing in a very, very loose, wrapped around the thread way. And I'm going to wrap that over the body towards the eye. I like to wrap over loosely applied dubbing a lot of times instead of trying to make it too tight. That's good. Okay. I'm going to wrap this hackle fiber about 3.5 times up to the ball of the jig and tie that off. With these hackle fibers, I'm going to trim the fibers that are on the back and also on the very bottom, so they're mostly just sticking out on the sides of the hook here and here. Okay, it's time for the shellback for the fly. I'm going to wrap back through this hackle to also secure that it won't fall off the fly when a lot of fish eat it. And I have a strip of this the Duraskin shellback material that I'm going to hold down on the back right above about where the point of the hook is, or a little bit maybe back past that. And I'm going to do 2 wraps around that, and I'm going to come underneath, keeping the thread tight with the wrap. Here in the middle of the body, I'm going to do another 2 wraps and come around underneath. And then here at the ball of the jig, I'm going to take more of the dubbing. And by loading dubbing here at the ball of the jig, it minimizes how much of the metal jig can be seen. And you want to always minimize the amount of metal the fish can see there. So I've increased the dubbing around the ball. So I'm going to take the back material and I'm going to try to center it so that I can see that the eye of the hook is right in the middle of the material. I'm going to cut a little tiny cut with my scissors at that point. And now I'm going to force the material over the eye. I try to make that cut as small as I can so it minimizes the amount of lead that's shown around it when I do this. Okay, so that goes through there. I'm going to fold the tail here around, and then I'm going to go all the way around the outside of it here at the base of the jig and try to center it. A couple wraps, and then I'm going to do a whip finish, a few turns there. Clip the thread, and come back through and clip the tail material, making that rubber bumper on the back end of the fly there. I want that to be a little bit wide, like the way a crayfish's tail folds around. Now I'm going to come back through and trim these tentacles just a little bit longer than the legs. And I'm going to take my pair of pliers and all of that round lead on that fly. I'm going to squeeze that and make that wider. There's some hackle fibers that have kind of been wrapped down by thread that I'm going to come back underneath and try to grab a few of these hackle fibers. They're already held down by extra wraps of thread, so it's not going to break the hackles. I can kind of pick those out. That's good. And then there's thread here, exposed thread on the top of the back material. You want to cover that with head cement or lacquer to make this fly as durable as it can be, all the way around the whip finish and the two bands on the back. So that's the classic tie of the crayfish fly. And with that tie, with that amount of lead and the rubber back material wrapped around the jig ball, as that fly is tied to your line, it sinks, tail sliding back. It has this kind of wide profile, especially if you flatten it with the pliers like I did, where when you're tight to it, it's going to glide through the water more than dropping flat. And as that fly glides through the water, the silicone legs that are cut into with the thread, they'll do something where as the fly moves, the legs will tuck back with the fly, but when the fly comes and thumps against the bottom and stops, the legs will pop back out a little bit, which if a trout is following it is a very natural movement that it does. But the most important aspect of the fly is where the tail has the material wrapped around, and every time the fly touches the bottom, it creates a tiny thump that is the same thump of vibration when you tie the fly heavy like this that a small baby crayfish makes when a trout is moving through the water and it's fleeing from it. Or a crayfish is just in the drift and it moves backwards because their eyes, they move backwards so they can't see where they're going. They always bump into something and then they stop. And the trout have a lateral line that can sense the movement, not the movement, the vibration of when that the crayfish will move back into something and bump. And so you fish the crayfish fly, tracking it down through the current until it hits the bottom, and then, you know, you want to be kind of semi-tight with the fly so that it's bumping along the bottom and you can feel the stop of the fly hitting the bottom, but the fish can feel the stop of the fly hitting the bottom as well. And so having that rubber bumper on that fly allows this fly to create a vibration pattern that really other flies aren't showing the fish, and having the fly on a 90-degree hook allows you to get on top of the way you're connected to that fly and get that gliding presentation as it's sinking. That is a type of movement to the fly that is hard to replicate other ways in something that's not a natural food source. So those are some of the reasons why
this is a really effective fly on wild fish and some big fish.